Hello and welcome to this 3-part workshop. Now we're going to be talking all about thoughts and specifically those more difficult thoughts, worries, and that narrative of inner judgment and criticism of yourself. We're going to be thinking about really what they're all about, where they come from, and how you can cope with them maybe in a different way. Now, I split it into 3 parts because this is quite a big topic and I don't want to rush through any bits. So if I just give you a quick overview of what the 3 days are going to look like. Now, today we're going to be defining some parts of our thought process and kind of getting clear on what might be happening in our minds and why. What might be happening in our minds that feels distressing or that just feels like it's kind of holding you back in some way. And we're going to be thinking about where those processes might have come from. Next session, we're going to be doing things a bit more experiential, some exercises that will help you start to make some shifts in how you're relating to your thoughts and your mind. And then in the 3rd session, we'll bring it all together and we'll also be thinking about how you can maintain good mental health and good kind of health in terms of your thoughts and your mind going forward so that you can hopefully benefit from this workshop long after it's over. So I've also included some exercises with each of the sessions just to really add to the learning. And, in these, the format of it's going to be me talking you through in this way that you can see here, which sometimes, we can still learn that way, but it's often useful to take information in, kind of let it settle a bit, and then apply it to some exercises and apply it to yourself. So those are all included as well, just to help you, as I say, get the most really out of these 3 workshops. Okay, so let's get started. Now, what I want to talk about first of all is just kind of thoughts generally, okay, because we all have thousands of thoughts every day. It's generally accepted now that we have around 6,000 thoughts a day or so. And that's a lot of thoughts, right? There are all manner of thoughts. Every single human being has all different types of thoughts. Every single type of thought you can imagine, all of us walking around have at some point during the day. However, for some people, they are able to just kind of let the thoughts be there without paying much attention to them. And for some other people, probably including yourself and me as well, which is partly why I got so interested in therapy and in thoughts in the first place, we maybe fuse more to our thoughts. So we take them maybe quite seriously. We kind of pay attention to them. On top of that, we know that our childhood really affects how our mind develops. It affects how our brain pathways form, which in turn informs the type of thoughts that we have. Now, as I said, everybody has all different types of thoughts. So every single person in the world at some point has had thoughts about themselves that are negative. They've had thoughts about the future that are worrying thoughts, concerning thoughts. They've had thoughts about their loved ones that make them feel worried. They've had negative thoughts, positive thoughts, neutral thoughts, silly thoughts, and everything in between. However, if you found yourself in a childhood environment that maybe just lacked the emotional input that you needed, so whether that was maybe having parents who were emotionally immature themselves, they weren't quite able to understand their own feelings and thoughts and not able to help you do the same, or if maybe you grew up in a chaotic environment or an environment that just felt out of your control, if there were events happening that felt far beyond what you could impact or have any effect over, then what can happen is our mind becomes a bit of a sanctuary at first. So for children, actually worrying can feel strangely comforting sometimes because it gives them the illusion of control. it helps them feel as if they're doing something, because worry can trick us into that, right? We can think we've done something. If we've sat and worried about the test results, or we've sat and worried about what might be happening to our sister or our friend, then it feels as if we've done something about that, even though we haven't actually, right? But that's what it feels like. So for children, it can feel as if they've kind of contributed in some way when they've been worrying about something. So if you found yourself in a childhood environment that made you feel particularly out of control, for example, you might have found yourself developing this habit of worrying and going into your mind and creating, as I said before, kind of like a sanctuary. It becomes our friend, okay? Our mind becomes our friend. It becomes our safe place sometimes. If maybe our parents or our teachers or our siblings or the other adults in our life, if they weren't so safe, if they weren't that predictable, maybe weren't that reliable, or maybe just not that emotionally available, then our friend becomes that available safe space. Now that kind of works early on, as with so many coping strategies. It does work at first, but at some point along the line, it starts becoming unhelpful, because then we end up living in our head. You know, there's that expression of somebody living in their head, which I think does really describe a lot of people's experience of life and of themselves. It also, I mean, when we live in our head, it does block us from the present, but it also means that we start to really take our thoughts ever so seriously, and we use them as our primary guide. And this also happens when we've not had that emotional input that I was talking about earlier, which means that our emotions, our actual feelings, though the sensations that happen in our body when we have certain emotional responses, they become confusing or overwhelming or blocked out altogether. And so that just leaves our thoughts. So then what we find is that we're navigating through life with our thoughts being our only way to make decisions, our only way to understand ourselves, our only way to understand our environment, our relationships, our situation. And so what happens then is that we come up against maybe a day when your brain is producing a lot of critical thoughts about yourself, for example. So those, I'm not good enough, I'm doing it badly, I keep messing up, what's wrong with me, those kinds of thoughts. And instead of being able to let them be there, and we'll talk about how to do that next session, we're going to do some exercises specifically to enable us to do that. But instead of just letting them be there, we want to change them, or we take them at face value, and we think that we really are not good enough. We think that our brain, our mind, is telling us the truth, because we've had to develop this relationship with our mind early on in life, in which we've had to be able to trust it, right? We've had to be able to trust our thoughts, because we couldn't quite maybe trust mum and dad, or we couldn't fully rely on our teachers or our friends or our grandparents, and we couldn't quite rely on other people. So we learned to rely on our thoughts. But then on those critical days, those days when the inner critic is loud, or those days when the worries just keep coming and coming and coming and coming, we don't have a way to cope with that. So there are two things happening then that differentiate people who have these thousands of thoughts a day, but they're relatively sort of able to cope with it, relatively unaffected. We're all affected by our thoughts to some extent, but they're relatively, and then people who, myself included, maybe you as well, perhaps, that we kind of get affected by our thoughts. So there's this component of taking our thoughts seriously, which we want to learn how to move away from. And there's also this aspect of probably having more frequent critical thoughts and more frequent worries because you will have developed that as a child as a coping strategy. And I'll talk a bit more about that later on in this session. So what I'm wanting to help you achieve over these few sessions is to help you change your relationship with your thoughts, basically change your relationship with your mind, so that it becomes less about you being sort of led by your thoughts and more that you are back in the driving seat and you are not your thoughts. And how do we know that you're not your thoughts? Because we can talk about them objectively. So if we can think about our thoughts, which we can, then we know that they're external to an extent, even though they're in your mind. Stay with me. It does get a little bit abstract, but hopefully it will come clear and make sense as we go. So we know that you are not your thoughts. I am not my thoughts because I can think about my thoughts. I can kind of look at my thoughts, if you like. I can tell what they are, which means that that's not me. And that's the same for you. And so we want to change the relationship you have with your thoughts and with your mind, because then you, and that means you in all of your full self. That means your emotions, that means your intuition, that means your instincts, that means your values, that's your past, your present, your future, and it does include your thoughts, but that's a tiny component. What we want to do is bring all of this together, and that's the you that's leading your life, that's making your decisions, that's able to go for the job interview even though your thoughts are telling you not to bother, or that's where you're going to be living from, essentially. And you're not going to be living from your thoughts anymore, but we need to then tweak that relationship that you have with your mind. And also I do want to help you just do a little bit of a tune in and maybe a bit of a reset even around your general mental health, because obviously the term mental health is used a lot, it's used very widely, but if we kind of break it down to its core, our thoughts match our mood. And so when we are having more and more, let's say, critical thoughts, judgmental thoughts, for example, then your mood is going to be matching that. Okay, you're going to feel not good, you're going to feel on edge, you're going to feel maybe quite sad and flat, you're going to not feel good. And it works both ways. So then when your mood gets into that sort of state, that lower state, then you are going to be having more and more thoughts about yourself that are negative, and it's a vicious cycle. So we do also want to just be thinking about, and we'll do this in the final session, thinking about kind of how you can really take care of yourself overall, which is going to then reduce the frequency and the intensity of some of those more difficult thoughts. Now, there's nothing wrong with them. All thoughts are really harmless and benign. They're just kind of things that are produced by our mind that just kind of can run through our head. They really don't have any consequence. However, I'm also aware that it is distressing. It takes a bit of energy, a bit more effort to manage some of those thoughts, those are the thoughts that have brought you here, of course, to this workshop. So whatever we can do to just reduce the frequency and the intensity of those kind of critical thoughts and those worrisome thoughts, that's a positive thing, right? So we'll be talking about that as well. So what I want to do now is just to talk a bit about worry. Okay, so first of all, how do we classify worry? Well, a worry is any kind of what if thought. What if I get ill? What if my children die? What if I lose my job? What if I don't find a partner? All of these types of thoughts that are typically about a hypothetical future. Okay, they're about things that haven't happened yet that you fear happening. So that's what we classify as a worry. And worrying is something that I touched on this earlier, that, you know, it often forms in childhood, it often forms quite early on as a means of control. We inherently have very little control in life. We're born, we don't know why we're born, we don't know what quite to do with the years that we have. We don't know when our year's going to end. We don't know what's going to happen in life. We don't know what's going to happen to us, to our loved ones. So all of this comes with a great deal of natural anxiety for human beings, and that is completely normal. Then what we can do is develop this strategy of worrying as a means to try to control, to try to have an impact on things that ultimately we cannot have any impact on. And so what can form our beliefs about worry? Okay, these are often unconscious beliefs, and sometimes they're kind of learned beliefs as well. Sometimes maybe you will have seen perhaps a prominent figure in your life when you were growing up worrying a lot, maybe a mum, maybe dad, auntie, someone or other who you kind of picked up on this being a way that they were trying to manage their environment, and perhaps that then kind of was something that you took on and internalized. But also beliefs about worry form just because we, as I say, we're just trying desperately really to control our environment, to control our life, to control what happens to us. So I just want to run through the three most prominent beliefs about worry that I have come across as a therapist. That there are lots and lots of different beliefs about worry, but these are the kind of three main big hitters, if you like. So one is that worrying means that I care. So this relates specifically, obviously, to other people, but also to situations. So there can be, you know, let's say if your friend tells you that they are feeling unwell and they're awaiting some test results, for example, then you might find yourself worrying about your friend, about what if they're not well, what would happen to their children, what's going to happen to their husband, how are they going to feel, how will they cope. All of these types of thoughts might be running through your mind until the point of the test results, perhaps, or maybe it'll kind of come in and out. And that might be underpinned by this belief that worrying means that you care. When actually what we can start to do is, as we go through this process, we're going to be separating ourselves from our thoughts a bit. We're going to be kind of unfusing from them. So we're not quite so kind of, you know, this is us and this is our thoughts. We're going to be recognizing the gap that exists in between. And actually, you are here and you care about your friend. No matter what, we assume you care about them, you want what's best for them, and you want them to avoid any kind of significant pain and suffering. And then your thoughts are here, your worries here. It's not like this, it's like this. And actually the worrying part is just causing you anxiety. Nothing else. It doesn't affect the test results for your friend. It's not going to make your friend feel better. It's not going to change the outcome of the situation. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, but it's just useful to be thinking about the function of worry, right? So that's one belief that you may or may not identify with. Another is this idea that worrying is motivating. I think this particularly forms when you've maybe had quite a lot of pressure as you've been growing up during your childhood and your adolescence, and maybe you felt some kind of pull between, as we all do, as is very human, some kind of pull between, I should be doing such, I should be working, or I should be focusing on that project, or I should be studying, but I don't want to. I want to watch telly, or I want to see my friends, or I want to go for a walk. And this kind of dissonance, and we have in our society, particularly in the kind of Western world, we are really obsessed with productivity. We're really obsessed with getting things done efficiently and just getting a lot done, basically. And that's not necessarily a natural state for human beings. Our output is kind of designed to not do a vast amount, really, in its most natural form. All we're really primed to do is to make sure that we survive. So making sure we get the food that we need, and that's about it, really. Enough sleep and some social connection. We are social beings, so some kind of human connections, interactions, and that's basically what we're set up to do. But in the modern world, of course, there are these layers upon layers upon layers of tasks that we're expected to do every day, whether it's work, whether it's raising children more in isolation than before. Ultimately, we were originally designed to raise children in community, which we don't really have in that same kind of way anymore. So this need to create some kind of motivation from somewhere can run quite deep. So this idea that worrying will motivate me. It will motivate me to get things done. If I think about the having to go and do the food shop, for example, well, I'm going to start, if I start worrying about, what if I don't get it? What if I don't do it well? Then, we'll have nothing for dinner, and the week will be really disorganized, and everything's going to get away from me, and I'm going to feel really overwhelmed, and then I won't be able to do such and such next week, and so on. And then, okay, right, I'm going to get up off the sofa, and I'm going to go and do the food shop. When actually, there is, the more that we start recognizing that, again, you are not your thoughts, you are not the worry, we can trust you. You will do what you need to do. You can trust yourself, instead of needing this component of worrying and getting anxious and focusing on something. This isn't the motivator. This is the worry that's actually draining you. You are able to keep your life running, do what you need to do in a timely way, and in a way that is practical for you, in terms of not burning out and not feeling depressed and strung out or really anxious by the end of the week, right? That there is this natural kind of rhythm that you will fall into if you trust yourself. But often we can kick into worrying instead. And then the third belief is that worrying will prepare me. So this idea that this really does relate back to that control element as well, quite heavily. So, if something bad happens, well, if I've been worrying about my child getting unwell, then maybe I'll be more prepared for it. Maybe it won't be such a shock, because shock feels really out of my control. Okay, so let me kind of worry about that, and then maybe I can avoid it as well, right? I'll be prepared for that first sign that they're not well, and I'll be able to get them to the doctor straight away, and I'll be able to avoid that whole really painful experience. So there's this idea that worrying will prepare you for the worst case scenarios. If you've already thought of it, then it's not going to come as a surprise. And if you've already thought of it, you might be able to get in there early as well, as an added bonus. And so, again, we can just start questioning, where has this come from? Where has this strategy, this approach originated from? And is it helpful anymore? How does it feel to be worrying? How does it feel to be running through the worst case scenarios? And let's remind ourselves, we come back again to us. You are here, you are this. You are not your thoughts, you are not your worries. None of this actually has any consequence on the outcome of life. But you can trust yourself, and you have agency, and you have power, and you will be able to cope with whatever happens. Because another way we can think about worrying, and of course, it triggers anxiety. It's also caused by anxiety. It's a kind of loop, if you like. Is that there's an equation that was written out, and I'll put this in the exercise for you. But it's the worry and anxiety is created by the overestimation of threat or danger, and the underestimation of your ability to cope. So then at that apex, we get anxiety and worry as a means to try to control. So that's the overestimation of threat or danger. So that's thinking, okay, so this is likely to happen. This bad thing is likely to happen, whereas actually the threat is probably a lot lower, maybe in reality. And then that's compounded by this sense that you're not going to be able to cope if it does happen. You're not going to be able to cope with a bad thing. So in order to be managing your anxiety, reducing the frequency and the intensity of these kind of worrisome thoughts, it's about trying to build your sense of your own ability to cope. And that happens over time. That also happens when we bring down our anxiety. So all of this stuff sort of overlaps with one another. So let's now talk a bit about the inner critic. So this really relates to all of those kind of negative thoughts about yourself, okay? So this might be, thinking, I'm not able to do this. I'm not going to be able to get this done properly, or I messed up today and I really shouldn't have messed up. I've messed up again, or what's wrong with me, or nobody likes me, or I'm not good enough, I'm boring, or I'm not likable. All those thoughts about they're often related to kind of mistakes and just your sense of yourself. It's kind of an attack really on your sense of self. So let's break down where this inner critic comes from. Now, as I said at the beginning of the session, everybody has all types of thoughts. Everybody has critical thoughts about themselves. But for some people, they are quite rampant, they're quite frequent, they're quite intense. And again, if these are the types of, if you tend to really take your thoughts seriously and really pay attention to them, then of course these kinds of thoughts feel really painful and they feel really damaging. And so we want to definitely take the power out of these thoughts, which we will be doing as we go forward. So, but let's think about where the inner critic comes from. So it's really a combination of two main factors. So one is the critical voices that you heard, particularly as you were growing up and forming. So your childhood, your adolescence, in those early years. I mean, the human brain isn't actually fully formed, fully grown until we're 25. So until that point, we're kind of really absorbing everything really heavily. So the earlier in our life, we're absorbing everything up until the age of 7. It's as if we're in a state of hypnosis. So we're really absorbing at a really kind of unconscious, dominant level. But then as we get older, it lessens, but still that first 25 years actually is when we're really taking in what everyone's saying about us. We're really hearing it and it's really affecting us. So if you found yourself with a parent or parents who were critical of you, first and foremost, then that experience is going to be difficult and damaging in lots of ways. But one of the ways is that likelihood is you'll internalize that. You'll internalize what they've been saying about you and to you. This can also apply as well if you have parents who are very critical of themselves or very judgmental generally. And so if you're exposed to a lot of this kind of judgmental narrative of hearing them criticize what people have done, their efforts, maybe mocking people if they make mistakes, maybe mocking themselves if they make mistakes, or kind of chastising themselves, then all of this is going to be contributing to your inner dialogue, that narrative that you have with yourself. Now, it's not just parents, it's also dominant adults mostly, that you have, as I say, in those early years, in your childhood, in your adolescence, hearing what they're saying, taking it on board what that nasty teacher said over and over again to you, or maybe just that one time in a way that really stuck, or taking on board your uncle who you see a lot of the time, him, if he was critical of your sports performance or your academic achievements or whatever it might be, that is going to all contribute to how you see yourself. And our inner critic is that more negative side of how we see ourselves, basically. So that's one part of it, is where we're thinking about what was happening in your relationships, in your environment when you were growing up, that has affected how you feel about yourself and how you think about yourself, because that's the inner critic. The other component of the inner critic is your brain trying to protect you. So if we think about these criticisms, they are unpleasant, but also they are underneath, they are designed to keep you safe. So if we just remind ourselves that the function of the mind is to keep us safe, not to keep us happy, not to keep us fulfilled, or, striving towards our goals, or having a meaningful life, or living in line with our values. No, it doesn't care about any of that stuff whatsoever. You care about that, and you are not your mind, but your mind doesn't care about that, and your mind is where your thoughts are generated. Now, your mind just wants to keep you safe. So if we think about, that inner critic saying, don't go for that job interview, it's ridiculous, you've not got a chance, who are you kidding, who do you think you are, it's way out of your league, just stay put, stay safe, you get your paycheck every week, or maybe you don't get your paycheck every week, but please just don't go for that job interview, you're going to be useless. Okay, so that's the inner critic. And actually, maybe you can hear it as I was saying it, that there's that protective element. It's horrible, right? But it's trying to protect you from that painful rejection that your mind remembers from all these different times. Your mind is obviously linked to your nervous system. It's collating all of this information from the minute that you're born. Actually, even earlier, even when you're in utero, it's collecting information, storing it. So your mind is remembering all those times when you felt rejected and how yucky it felt. It felt miserable. So don't go for the job interview, because you're just going to feel that again. There's a risk that you might feel that. So let's just not take the risk, right? This is the inner critic. The inner critic is trying to protect you, it's trying to keep you safe. Even those thoughts, about, okay, you're not likable, no one likes you, no one cares about you, no one wants to be friends with you, no one wants to be in a relationship with you, these kind of critical inner thoughts. Even those have a protective component. Now we know, and we're not our minds, but we know that isn't going to be helpful, right? We know this is not going to help you get to where you want in life. However, your mind is just thinking, don't risk, again, it might be the rejection, don't risk the rejection, don't risk that pain of having a relationship and then it falls apart again. Don't risk putting yourself out there trying to make friends with someone who might not turn out to be good for you. Maybe you're going to have a difficult experience with them, like that other friendship, for example. And so your mind is trawling through all of this information of your past experiences. And obviously you're a human, so you will have experienced a range of things. You will have experienced some brilliant friendships and some rubbish friendships, some great relationships and some not so good relationships. And so your mind is trawling through all of them and then combining with what you were exposed to in terms of who you are as a person, based on the people that you grew up around, the people who raised you specifically. And so it's combining these two things and generating these thoughts that are designed to keep you small and staying put and keeping yourself to yourself and not putting yourself out there, not taking risks. And so this is the inner critic trying to protect you, but not that useful, right? So what we can do is learn, and as I said, next session we're going to be doing these specific exercises to help you unfuse from your thoughts. So this kind of the gap, we're going to be putting that gap in. The gap's there, but maybe you can't see the gap right now. We're going to be creating that actively with these specific exercises, because when you do that, what you will be able to do is recognize that your inner critic, that criticism, that it's there. Okay, you can notice it. We can't eradicate it. We can work on reducing the intensity and frequency, but we can't eradicate it. Everybody has these types of thoughts, but you'll be able to kind of look at it in the same way as if somebody was saying these things to you, when you're feeling kind of well and resilient and okay, that you can objectively look back and think, that's not true. I'm not, I have absolutely got a chance with this job interview. And even if I don't, it doesn't matter. Who cares if I go and it doesn't work out? I'll give it a shot anyway. And so you can start doing the same thing with your thoughts. You can, or also, another approach is when we create that gap, we unfuse, we remind ourselves that we are not our thoughts, then there's also the power to just notice them, just literally notice them, kind of coming in and coming out, and knowing that it's just our mind doing its thing, generating these thoughts. We don't have to take them seriously. We don't have to believe them. We hold the power. The thoughts do not hold the power. So hopefully that has been helpful to just kind of break down those two main concepts, the worrying and the inner critic. And I've prepared an exercise for you which is going to help kind of tie this information together. It won't take very long, take about 10 minutes or so. So if you want to, then you can engage with that task, just so that it makes this all a little bit more potent, really more helpful. And then I can't wait to see you next session. So next session we will be doing these exercises, some of this more experiential stuff, to help you create that gap, to help you unfuse, so that you can start noticing your thoughts. You can challenge them a bit if you want, or you can just let them be. But either way, they are not going to be causing you half as much bother anymore. So yes, I will see you back here tomorrow. Take care.